Last episode, we practiced soliciting client feedback as a way to develop better therapeutic alliances. But sometimes you don't have to solicit client feedback at all. Your client will let you know that there's been a rupture in the relationship, and that can be a pivotal moment in therapy. Now, these ruptures can be defined as any event in the context of therapy that causes a strain or breakdown in the therapeutic alliance. And remember, that alliance is one of the most important common factors that leads to good clinical outcomes. When a client responds in a way that indicates a rupture has taken place, it's crucial to take steps to repair the alliance. The goal of responding to a rupture is to help recreate safety within the therapeutic relationship. This is done by conveying appreciation, validation, and curiosity about the client's experience. And that experience will likely vary significantly from client to client. The impact of a therapeutic rupture is often difficult to predict and requires humility to allow the client's experience to take priority over a therapist's defensiveness, hurt, or disagreement. And regardless of the source of the rupture, repair always begins with a desire to understand more about what took place from the client's perspective. Here's the skill criteria for responding to therapeutic ruptures. First, express appreciation for the client's disclosure. Second, convey empathy, validation, and/or accountability. And last, respond with a question or statement that invites the client to discuss their subjective experience related to the rupture. And for this exercise, feel free to switch up the order between skill criteria 1 and 2. Either way is perfectly fine. Now let's hear an example of a client statement and therapist response that meets these 3 criteria.
Last session, when you got my girlfriend's name wrong, that really bothered me. It felt like you haven't been paying attention.
I'm glad you're sharing this with me, and I can understand why you're bothered by it. Can you tell me more about how that made you feel?
That's a brief response, but you can see how it met all 3 skill criteria. Criteria 1, express appreciation for the client's disclosure, was met by the comment, "I'm glad you're sharing this with me." Criteria 2, to convey empathy, validation, and/or accountability, was met by the second half of that sentence, and I can understand why you're bothered by it. And then Jen said, "Can you tell me more about how that made you feel?" which met criteria 3, to respond with a question or statement that invites the client to discuss their subjective experience related to the rupture. And just a reminder, since we have 3 skill criteria for this exercise, you can find these criteria in the show notes and also on our website, sentio.org, along with the client statements and sample responses. Now, let's hear the demo segment of the episode. And as always, you can skip ahead to the practice segment if you're ready to try all 15 client statements in a row. And this can be a tough skill to master. Carrie, can you start us off with client statement number 1?
Last session, when you got my girlfriend's name wrong, that really bothered me. It felt like you haven't been paying attention.
First of all, thank you for sharing that. I'm really sorry that I got your girlfriend's name wrong, and I'll really try to be more mindful of this the next time we talk about this. And I'm wondering, as you're sharing your sort of frustration about this with me, how does it feel for you? Do you feel comfortable with where we're at and moving forward from here?
Yeah, I think that's a really great response. And I liked how in expressing appreciation, you said, "I'm sorry," or you said thank you to express appreciation. Then you said, "I'm sorry," to express accountability. And you did it quickly, and then you pivoted to what's, of course, the most important part of this, which is to ask Carrie something about what she said so you can better understand her experience. And I think you did that really well, and we can go on to number 2.
This is kind of hard to say, but you've been late to all of our sessions this month. Sometimes I wonder if you even care.
I appreciate the honesty with which you are sharing this with me. I imagine it must not have been easy for you because you're not quite sure how I'll react. I'm really sorry for being late for our sessions, and I will really try to be on time in future, and that's on me. And I'm wondering what's how you're feeling. Dang. Sorry. Okay, let's do that again.
Okay. This is kind of hard to say, but You've been late to all of our sessions this month. Sometimes I wonder if you even care.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I imagine that it must have been hard for you to share that, not knowing how I would react. And I'm sorry for being late, and that's absolutely on me. And I'm wondering how my being late has really affected you and your experience in therapy so far.
Yep, that was perfect. You did a great job expressing appreciation. I think you conveyed accountability by saying I'm sorry, but you also conveyed empathy by saying, something like I can imagine why you'd be feeling the way you do. I forget what you said, but it really stood out as a good empathic response. And then in asking Carrie for just some information about her experience of you being late really meets skill criteria 3 of inviting her to discuss that. So good work. Let's keep going.
That was a really abrupt ending last session. I know we only have an hour, but I was kind of in the middle of something. That's been on my mind, and I'm a little pissed off about it.
I appreciate that you're sharing this with me, right? And it makes sense to me that that when you're in the middle of something, you kind of want it to feel a little bit more complete as opposed to it ending because of a time constraint. And I'm wondering how you feel about us using today's session to really continue off where we left off, and I'll try to be more mindful this time around of not leaving, not ending it on such an abrupt note.
So in this case, it's a small detail, but I want to have you do that again. You did a great job with the first 2 skill criteria, but with skill criteria 3, you were saying like, how do you feel about us continuing where we left off last session? And I'll try to be more mindful. And that's not exactly asking Carrie to discuss the experience of the rupture itself.
Yeah,
And so that's specifically what we're focusing on here. So
yeah.
let's give that another try and make that your focus for criteria 3.
That was a really abrupt ending last session. I know we only have an hour, but I was kind of in the middle of something. That's been on my mind, and I'm a little pissed off about it.
I hear your frustration, and that makes a lot of sense to me, because you're in the middle of something, and you would ideally like to feel a little bit more complete, as opposed to it ending on a time constraint or on a very sort of sudden note. So thank you for sharing that, and I'll be more mindful of it in subsequent sessions. And I'm wondering, when we left off on the abrupt note last week, how did that impact you?
Yep, I think that was really great. I think that was perfect. You hit all the skill criteria, and you did it in a way that was really clear about what you're communicating to Carrie. Great work. Let's keep going.
I feel like this one's the hardest so far.
Oh
This
yeah,
one's the
absolutely.
hardest. My arms are like this. I tell. Okay.
I'm telling you, I'm looking at these statements. I'm like, I don't want to read these.
Yeah, I mean, if it's hard, I mean, the goal is to just practice until it feels easier. So if it's hard, it's hard.
You win.
I I win as long as you're doing the deliberate practice, no matter what. So if it's hard, if it's easy, as long as you're practicing and improving, it's a win.
When you take extra time at the end of the session to make sure I'm calm, sometimes I get the message that you don't think I can handle being upset after therapy. I feel like a child.
I'm really sorry that it came across that way. It really wasn't my intention, but I am really sorry about that, and I will be more mindful to find other ways to check in with you at the end of our session. And I'm wondering, when I kind of take that extra time to check in with you in the past sessions, how has that made you feel uncomfortable? Dang.
Let's try it again.
Again, yeah.
Yep. I can tell it just didn't quite sit right. Let's give it another try.
When you take extra time at the end of the session to make sure I'm calm, sometimes I get the message that you don't think I can handle being upset after therapy. I feel like a child.
I appreciate your honesty, and I'm hearing that you when I kind of take a few more moments at the end of our session to 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 check in with you, it makes you feel a little disrespected, and I'm really sorry that it came across that way. And I'm wondering, what's it like for you to be sharing this with me right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you're saying, what is it like for you to be sharing this with me? You're inviting Carrie to discuss her subjective experience about the rupture and how it feels in the moment. You did a good job expressing appreciation. And I think in statements like this, sometimes when a rupture happens, there may not be an impulse to be accountable, to apologize, because it may be that you did nothing wrong. I mean, sometimes ruptures just happen. And I think you did a good job of bringing in a sense of empathy and not necessarily saying, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I recognize that I messed up. You're sticking to something that feels true to yourself while also conveying empathy and letting Carrie feel heard, which is a great way to meet skill criteria too, if you're not so sure that there's anything you need to be apologizing for. So I think you're getting the hang of it, and let's move on to number 5.
Sorry, I'm a little taken aback by what you just said. It feels like you're judging me really harshly.
I'm really sorry. That wasn't my intention, but I'm really sorry that you felt judged by me. And I want to reassure you that I am really here to listen, and I really do care about you. But thank you for sharing that. And I'm wondering whether it was something about the way I spoke or the tone that didn't sit quite well with you. And I really want to do that a little bit better in our therapy session.
So there's a small detail that I want to make sure I'm pointing out, and we'll try this again. When you say, I'm sorry that you felt judged, it's it's not exactly accountability. It's almost like, I'm sorry that you were offended, where you're acknowledging that it happened, but you're not so much taking accountability by saying, I know that I did something. You're saying you felt judged and I'm sorry for that fact, but not so much for what I did that caused it, which is why in these scenarios where you're not quite sure if there's anything you should be apologizing for, you can always validate their feelings, you can always convey empathy, but when you say I'm sorry that you felt a certain way, it's almost like avoiding accountability despite using the words I'm sorry. So I'll have you try that one again, and when you're saying I'm sorry for anything, make sure that it's about something you did. And if you feel like that's not really accessible to you in this statement, then just focus more on being empathic or validating of Carrie's feelings.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm a little taken aback by what you just said. It feels like you're judging me really harshly.
Your frustration and anger makes a lot of sense to me. Right, that in saying what I just did, it came across as disrespectful. That wasn't my intention, but I'm really sorry that that I that statement came out that way. And I appreciate that you're sharing your very honest feelings about this with me. And I'm wondering, if in future when we talk about this, is there a way, is there something about my tone or the words that I use that you feel I, I should change to help you feel more comfortable?
So I think we're going to keep working on this because it's an important point. You did a really great job empathizing with the feelings that Carrie had. And then I think you said something similar to last time where it was like, I'm sorry that it came out that way. It wasn't my intention. And those are almost trying to, in some way, communicate that something happened and you're aware of it, but you're not taking full accountability. Because it's like, oh, I didn't mean it, and I'm sorry it came out that way. It's almost putting some of the burden on the client to say, this is because you interpreted it in such a way. And it's quite possible that the client did, but for skill criteria too, make sure that what you're communicating is strictly empathy, validation, or accountability. And there's nothing that could be like interpreted as defensiveness in a sense by saying, I didn't mean it that way, or other things that might communicate that message.
Right. I think my qualm with saying I'm sorry that I was judgmental feels like a little bit much, because I feel like then you go down the whole A, I don't know that that's my intent, and B, you go down the rabbit hole of a real rupture about trust, which
Oh,
may not have been the whole,
I,
which may be a bigger issue than it really was to begin with.
I think you're 100% right. And that's why for skill criteria too, it's empathy, validation, and or accountability. So what you said to Carrie last time, like if we could rewind the tape, it was great. You did a great job of empathizing with the feelings she had. And you could have just stopped there because it's giving
Okay.
that signal that like your feelings are welcome here. I get it. And if you feel like apologize, like in this case, apologizing for being judgmental doesn't really fit, then you can just leave out anything that has to do with an apology and just say, I appreciate you saying that. I understand why you feel the way you do. Tell me more. Something along those lines. And you just bypass the uncomfortable apology that doesn't seem like it fits for you.
Okay. Okay.
Great. Let's try that one again.
Sorry, I'm a little taken aback by what you just said. It feels like you're judging me really harshly.
Thank you for being honest with me about your anger and your frustration. I mean, I would feel pretty upset too if I felt like I was being judged by my therapist. So I I appreciate that you just shared what you did with me, and I'm wondering in future when we talk about this topic, it's just something about my tone or the words that I'm using that you feel uncomfortable with, just so that I know how to make this more comfortable for you as we go forward.
That was perfect. You hit all the skill criteria really well, and you avoided the thing we've been talking about, but you still did a great job of conveying empathy to say, if I were in your shoes, I'd feel the same way. So I really like that response, and let's keep going.
Does therapy have to be this expensive? Am I just a paycheck to you?
What I'm hearing is that the causes of therapy is the cost of therapy. Oh, damn. Fuck. Let's do that again.
Does therapy have to be this expensive? Am I just a paycheck to you?
What I'm hearing is that the cost of therapy they're really adding up for you, and you're wondering if I care, and I appreciate that you're raising this. I get that our therapeutic relationship and money are both sensitive topics to talk about, and I'm wondering if you feel like you want to say more about that.
I think I'll have you try this one again. When you say, well, I don't know, Jen, tell me, how did it feel for you? My concern is when you say, I'm wondering if you want to tell me more about that. You're kind of referring to the financial aspect of therapy, not so much the rupture of therapy. And I'm wondering if, as you were saying it, did it feel that way to you, or did it seem like you were more communicating that kind of open ended invitation for Carrie to talk about the rupture?
More the latter, but could see how you felt, could see why you felt the former
Okay.
as well. I think I left it as the latter because I felt like there were two issues that were coming up, money and then do you care? And I didn't know which one the client was concerned with, and so I just said, "What do you think?" As opposed to me deciding to zoom in on one or the other.
Okay. Yeah. And I think that that makes sense to me. I don't think we need to necessarily do it again if in your mind it felt like you were asking a question that got to the rupture as Carrie defined it. Um, so I think we can move on to the next one. And this is something that we can kind of hash out as we go if it keeps coming up.
I just don't think you know how to help me. This whole being mindful of my inner experience thing seems bogus.
It sounds like you're wondering if therapy can be helpful for you because the exercises that we've been doing in therapy haven't been landing for you as well as you like it. And I'm really sorry that I feel like I should have been more sensitive to your experience, and I should have checked in more with you along the way. So I'm really sorry that I haven't been doing that as well. And I'm wondering, how do you feel sharing what you just did with me, that therapy isn't working as well as you expected?
It was really great. and you'll hate me for pointing this out, but you skipped over skill criteria 1 to express appreciation. So I'm going to have you do it again just for the practice of it, but your response was really good. We just have to build in that additional part of saying thank you, I appreciate it, I'm glad that you shared that. Let's try that one again.
I forgot my answer. Okay.
I just don't think you know how to help me. This whole being mindful of my inner experience thing seems bogus.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I feel like it must have taken a lot out of you to be very upfront with me about how therapy isn't really, our therapy exercises haven't been working as well for you as you've liked. And I understand why that's frustrating, right, with the time and the effort that you're putting in. And, I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about how these exercises have not been working for you and whether there have been things that have been working for you so that we can find a way to move forward in a way that lands better for you.
Yeah, I think that was perfect. You met all the skill criteria really well. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Let's keep going.
My mother was trying to remind me to check in on my thoughts yesterday. So annoying. At least she's not as bad as you. You're always trying to solve my problems without possibly being able to understand what I'm going through.
I hear your frustration, right? And I'm sorry that I'm sorry. Let's do that again.
I'm sorry. My mother was trying to remind me to check in on my thoughts yesterday. So annoying. At least she's not as bad as you. You're always trying to solve my problems without possibly being able to understand what I'm going through.
I hear the frustration in your voice that you like it if I kind of paid more attention or thought to listening for where you're coming from and understanding your perspective before we talk about solutions. And I'll be more mindful of that in future going forward. So thank you for sharing that with me. That was really helpful to know. And I'm wondering, in going forward, would that work for you if I just gave you more space to talk? I think that was too task focused as opposed to discussing the rupture.
Yep, I think you're exactly
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I'm so glad that you caught it. Let's keep going. Or not, let's keep going. Let's try it again.
My mother was trying to remind me to check in on my thoughts yesterday. So annoying. At least she's not as bad as you. You're always trying to solve my problems without possibly being able to understand what I'm going through.
I understand why it's really frustrating, right, to constantly be kind of told, given advice without being really feeling like you've been listened to. And I'm sorry that I have been doing that as well, and I'll be more mindful in future to listen to you a little bit more as opposed to jumping in very quickly. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. It's really helpful for me to know going forward. And I imagine that it must have been hard for you to share that anger and frustration with me, and I'm wondering how you feel about that.
Great. Yep. And it's so great that you caught that you were going sort of down a road that was more task focused before, and now the question you're asking is really specific to like how did you feel about sharing this with me? So you're getting into that experience of the rupture. It's a really great distinction, and in this case can really build toward that kind of like healing that takes place after a rupture happens if the therapist is open to following these kinds of steps. So I really liked how you responded to that one, and we can move on to, I think, number 9.
I know you like feedback, so you should know that our work felt off today. But I'm not sure I want to talk about it.
Um, Thank you for sharing that, and for being considerate about how that I like feedback, and for sharing your feelings, even though I can sense that you're a little uncomfortable or ambivalent sharing that with me. And I am curious to know how what is it about where we're at now that's feeling uncomfortable for you to feel free to share these with me.
Yeah. Good job with skill criteria 1. You thanked Carrie. You did a good job with criteria 2. You said something that was really empathic. And then you moved to ask her to talk more about her experience of what happened. So you did a good job with those criteria, and we'll keep going on.
Seriously, I don't want to be here. The courts make me go, and now you're agreeing with them that I'm the problem.
I appreciate that you're sharing your very honest opinions about how you feel about therapy with me, and I'm really sorry that I have been complicit in making you feel like you're the problem, and I will try and be more mindful of this going forward. And I'm wondering whether there are certain areas in our. I'm going to the task thing again. Sorry, let's do that again. Oh.
Seriously, I don't want to be here. The courts make me go, and now you're agreeing with them that I'm the problem.
I imagine that it feels really terrible and annoying and and you feel unsupported if the courts and even your therapist is making you feel like you're the problem. So I'm really sorry that I've been complicit in that, and I really appreciate that you're sharing your honest feedback with me. And I'm wondering how you feel sharing this with me right now. Like, how comfortable do you feel about where we're at?
Yeah, it definitely meets the skill criteria. And I want to highlight something you did really well with skill criteria 2 when you said, I'm sorry that I've been complicit in you feeling that way. Just adding the I've been complicit part is the accountability. Because if you said, I'm sorry you feel that way, it goes back to what we had talked about. And I think you're doing a really good job of avoiding making that same mistake. And the reason I paused a bit before giving feedback is just because I think a lot of your responses with skill criteria 3 are about how does it feel sharing that with me, which certainly meets the criteria. But I'd like to see if you can get a bit more creative, let's say, and ask more directly about the rupture itself, just to see if we can find some different ways to meet the skill criteria, the third skill criteria.
Okay.
I'm doing number 10 again, right?
No, you can move on to number
We'll move
11.
on? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this for weeks. I saw you get off the bus before a session last month. Are you good at your job if you can't even afford a car?
Thank you for sharing that with me. And what I'm hearing from you is that you're wondering if about the amount of care that I can provide with you, to you, right? Given my own sort of circumstances, and that is a very reasonable thing to wonder about, because you want to be sure that you have good treatment as well, right? And that you're getting good quality of care. And I'm wondering how comfortable you are right now in raising that with me.
Yeah, you definitely meet the skill criteria. I think with criteria 3, it was a similar thing of saying, like, in the moment, how does it feel to talk about this rupture? So I'm not going to necessarily say you have to try that one again, because I think you're meeting the skill criteria. I know this is a hard skill in general. But going forward, if you feel like it's accessible, try and find a different way to meet skill criteria 3 that isn't just saying something like, how does it feel in this moment as you bring it up?
What if I had replaced that question just now with, is it difficult for you to talk about this with me? Is that substantially-ish different? No.
I think it's the same principle, just using different words. I think what I'm looking for is something more like, tell me more about how it made you feel when you saw me getting off the bus. Or
Ah,
how does it
voila.
make you feel about working with me as your therapist, knowing that I take the bus? Or something where you're getting into like the experience of the rupture itself, as opposed to the experience of telling you about the rupture in the moment.
Voila. Got it. Okay.
Right.
You're the worst. You keep asking me to interpret the situation in different ways. Like, my perspective is always wrong. It's like you're calling me a liar.
I get that it's very frustrating, right? That when I ask you to share your experiences and then I follow up with a statement that seems to counter it, it makes you feel like, why am I sharing that, right? It's very deflating. So I appreciate that you're giving me this feedback, and I'm really sorry, and I will be more mindful of it in future. And I if you're comfortable, I really want to find out more from you. When I make these statements, how does it make you feel?
Perfect. I think that may be your best one yet so far. That was great. I think every word of it was great. And I really liked how at the end you were saying, when these things happen, how does it make you feel, to really get at the heart of what is Carrie's subjective experience related to this rupture. So I think we're doing really well as we move on to the last few statements. And let's go to number 13.
This is bullshit. I'm sick of you asking me how I feel all the time.
Sorry, I think couldn't help but
I am
laugh
also
because
sorry.
I just literally just said, "How do you feel?" and you said that. Sorry.
Yeah, like, I know, this is like awful. Okay.
Okay.
This is bullshit. I'm sick of you asking me how I feel all the time.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that it can be very annoying, right? Whenever I ask you to check in with your feelings, and it's tiring, and it's just it can feel a bit of a drag. And I also want to say that I appreciate it that when I ask you to do that, that you kind of go along with it, right? And I'm wondering, whenever I ask you to check in with your feelings, what's that like for you?
It definitely meets the skill criteria, but this is tricky because you're essentially saying, when I ask you how you feel, how does that feel? Which is what Carrie's like
Ah,
very unhappy about. It's why this is one of the hardest client statements here.
I didn't even realize it.
Right, it's
Oh
tricky.
my God.
It's like saying, I don't like it when you do therapy with me, and then like, what do you say? But let's try it again, because I think you can definitely find ways to invite Carrie to talk about her experience here, about the rupture. And if you need to take a few seconds to think through it, please do. But I know you can get there, and I want to see what you'll come up with.
What if I say something like, talk to me about the frustration?
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
Okay.
This is bullshit. I'm sick of you asking me how I feel all the time.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I appreciate that, that it can be very repetitive and tiring, right? Whenever I keep asking you how you feel and ask you to check in with your feelings, and I also want to say that I really do appreciate it whenever you kind of go along with it, even though it's really annoying for you. I wonder if you are okay talking to me a little bit more about the frustration, just so that I understand more about where you're coming from with this.
That's great. I think there's nothing more directly inviting of somebody to talk about their subjective experience than to say, tell me more about the frustration you're feeling, or whatever emotion might be coming up. So you absolutely met the skill criteria. Good job getting around that kind of hurdle. And speaking of things that feel annoying and repetitive, let's keep going on to number 14.
I I heard you talking to your receptionist about me when I was leaving last week, and you used the wrong pronouns. I shouldn't have to correct my therapist of all people.
And you're absolutely right. I should have been more mindful about the pronouns that you prefer, and I get that this was also about being mindful of your gender and your experience and I really will try my best to be more mindful of this in future. So I'm really, really sorry that I was insensitive about this. And I want, and if you could just tell me more about what it was like when you heard me use the wrong pronouns with my receptionist.
Yeah, I think that was really good. Although I could have missed it, but I think you may have skipped over the skill criteria one to express appreciation. Do you recall if you had said anything along those lines?
I might have skipped it. Yeah.
Let's give that another try.
Okay.
I heard you talking to your receptionist about me when I was leaving last week, and you used the wrong pronouns. I shouldn't have to correct my therapist of all people.
And you're right. Thank you for sharing that with me. I so appreciate it. I had not realized it, but that's no excuse. I will be more mindful of this and your experience going forward. And I want to know more from you about what it was like when you heard me use the wrong pronouns with my when I was referring to you as I was talking to my receptionist.
Yeah, that was perfect. You met all the skill criteria really well. Let's go on to the last client statement.
You know, I've thought about not coming back ever since I saw that book about climate change on your shelf. You know it's a hoax, right? Do you really believe in that?
First of all, I mean, even though you didn't feel like coming, I appreciate that you came in and that you're really honest with me about your feelings and it must be annoying for you because you maybe felt like my values were not entirely aligned with yours. And I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit more about, when you saw the book on climate change on the shelf, what was that like for you?
I think that was really well done as well. And I really liked how you found empathy for it about the disconnect in values. And you didn't get into trying to apologize for something that of course you have no need to apologize for. But you allowed Carrie in this case, in this hypothetical, to feel seen, which is so important in these rupture moments where clients want to make sure that you're understanding where they're coming from. And then you did a good job with skill criteria 3 to ask what was it like in that moment. So, Jen, you made it through. Overall, I know this was the hardest one yet, but you did a really good job sticking with it. And I could see the improvement as you went. Really good job.
Thank you.
Welcome to the practice section of this episode. We like to add a note of encouragement here, or maybe a tip, or just a friendly reminder about these exercises. And it's never a bad idea to remind yourself that the sample responses you hear in the practice sections are one of an infinite number of correct replies. As long as you're meeting the skill criteria, it doesn't really matter if your response is different from what you'll hear Jen say in response to the client statements. That's one of the beautiful things about therapy. Each person can fit these skills into their own personal style to show up authentically with their clients. Jen's feedback for the skill was really interesting. If you listen to the demo section, you heard her struggling at times. And she commented how, with the previous 4 skills, you're mostly just focusing on what the client is saying. But with this one, you also have to pay attention to what the client isn't saying, as well as what you're feeling as the therapist. This is harder because it's about you, not just something in the client's life. You have to put aside your ego. It can be tough, and the margin for error is smaller because ruptures can be a crucial moment in therapy. However, some clients don't get that kind of humility from other people in their life, and you can do a lot of good by showing them that you can handle what's being said to you. Once more, the skill criteria for responding to therapeutic ruptures are: first, express appreciation for the client's disclosure. Second, convey empathy, validation, and/or accountability. And last, respond with a question or statement that invites the client to discuss their subjective experience related to the rupture. Good luck, and have some fun with these 15 client statements.
Last session, when you got my girlfriend's name wrong, that really bothered me. It felt like you haven't been paying attention.
I'm glad you're sharing this with me, and I can understand why you're bothered by it. Can you tell me more about how that made you feel?
This is kind of hard to say, but you've been late to all of our sessions this month. Sometimes I wonder if you even care.
You're right, and I'm really sorry for being late. Thank you for bringing that up. How has it impacted you?
That was a really abrupt ending last session. I know we only have an hour, but I was kind of in the middle of something. That's been on my mind, and I'm a little pissed off about it.
Of course, I can imagine it was tough to have to stop at the end last week. I appreciate you telling me how you feel. I'd like to hear more about the thoughts you've had about what happened.
When you take extra time at the end of the session to make sure I'm calm, sometimes I get the message that you don't think I can handle being upset after therapy. I feel like a child.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me. And I'm sorry that I caused you to feel this way. Tell me more about what it's like for you when I take that time at the end of the session.
Sorry, I'm a little taken aback by what you just said. It feels like you're judging me really harshly.
I can see that something important just happened, and I'm glad that you're telling me this. And I'd like to hear more about what's happening right now.
Does therapy have to be this expensive? Am I just a paycheck to you?
I'll answer those questions in a moment, but I understand if you're bothered. I'm glad you're able to ask me those questions. Can you share how this makes you feel?
I just don't think you know how to help me. This whole being mindful of my inner experience thing seems bogus.
Right. I'm sorry it hasn't been helpful for you so far. And thank you for letting me know what's on your mind. What's it like for you that we are focusing on something that seemed bogus so far?
My mother was trying to remind me to check in on my thoughts yesterday. So annoying. At least she's not as bad as you. You're always trying to solve my problems without possibly being able to understand what I'm going through.
I think it's good that you're sharing this with me because I hear you saying that what your mother does bothers you and that I'm doing something similar. Can you tell me more about how it feels when I try to solve your problems like that?
I know you like feedback, so you should know that our work felt off today. But I'm not sure I want to talk about it.
I appreciate your honesty, and I know it's tough sometimes to talk about when sessions feel off. I'd like to hear more about your experience, but you certainly don't have to share if you don't want to.
Seriously, I don't want to be here. The courts make me go, and now you're agreeing with them that I'm the problem.
Let's talk about this. If you feel like I think you're the problem, I'm glad you're bringing it up and it's important to discuss. What makes you think that I'm agreeing with them?
I've been thinking about this for weeks. I saw you get off the bus before a session last month. Are you good at your job if you can't even afford a car?
It sounds like this is important to you if you've been thinking about it for weeks, so I appreciate you letting me know that it's been on your mind. How do these thoughts about me change your feelings about therapy?
You're the worst. You keep asking me to interpret the situation in different ways. Like, my perspective is always wrong. It's like you're calling me a liar.
Oh, I can see how that would be like me calling you a liar, and I appreciate that you're bringing it up. How does it impact you when you hear me suggesting that your perspective is always wrong?
This is bullshit. I'm sick of you asking me how I feel all the time.
I can understand how that might be bullshit. Thank you for telling me that my approach hasn't been right for you. I'd like to hear about what you think would work better to help better meet your goals in therapy.
I heard you talking to your receptionist about me when I was leaving last week, and he used the wrong pronouns. I shouldn't have to correct my therapist, of all people.
Thank you for telling me. That's my mistake, and I'm really sorry about that. If it's okay with you, I'm curious to know what it was like hearing me get your pronouns wrong.
You know, I've thought about not coming back ever since I saw that book about climate change on your shelf. You know it's a hoax, right? Do you really believe in that?
Let's talk about this. First, I'm glad that you're telling me what you've been thinking. It's clear that this bothers you. What does it mean for your feelings about therapy now that you've seen that book?
Thanks for listening to the Learn Psychotherapy podcast presented by Sentio University. Visit us at sentio.org for lots of free resources, including downloadable skill criteria, client statements, and sample responses. Our guest therapist for this season is Jen Ang. Caroline Wida is our mock client/actor in residence. And the video editors for our YouTube channel are Amy D. Smith and Alex Vosh. We'll see you next episode.